They thought she was just another woman walking her dog along the trail. That was their first mistake. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind that only happens in the interior of British Columbia, frost still clinging to the low grass, the air carrying that particular sharpness that cuts right through a jacket and reminds you that winter doesn't ask permission. The trail running along the edge of Kamloops Lake was mostly empty at that hour. A few dog walkers had passed earlier, a cyclist, nobody who stayed. Sergeant First Class Hazel Vorn had been up since 4:30. That wasn't unusual. Sleep had never come easy, not since Kandahar, and certainly not since the mission in Helmand Province that had cost her K9 partner 17 months of recovery and left her with a 2-inch scar along her left forearm that she still ran her thumb over when she was thinking hard about something. She'd made coffee, black, and stood at the kitchen window of her rental in Brocklehurst, watching the mountains go from black to purple to grey, while Kodiak ate his breakfast with the kind of focused dedication that she'd always admired in him. Kodiak was a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, 72 pounds of muscle and precision, and something that could only be described as professional pride. He'd been trained by the Canadian Armed Forces Military Working Dog Program out of CFB Borden, and before that he'd been shaped by the same instincts that had made his breed the preferred partner of special operations units across NATO. He had a scar on his left flank, pale against his darker fur, from a compound in Panjwai where he'd taken a fragment meant for her. She'd carried him out herself, 600 meters through open ground, and nobody who knew that story ever made the mistake of calling him just a dog. She clipped his lead, a formality more than a restraint, because Kodiak understood the difference between on duty and off, and this morning was officially off, and they started down the trail just as the sun began to cut along the ridgeline to the east. It was the kind of morning that could almost make you forget things. Almost. She'd been back in Canada for 8 months, posted to a desk at Canadian Forces Base Edmonton, while the paperwork around her unit's last operation wound its way through the appropriate channels. The assignment had the shape of a rest, though it didn't feel like one. She ran 5 kilometers every morning, kept her hand sharp at the range twice a week, and took Kodiak out here whenever the work let her, which lately had been more often than it should have been. There were things happening at the base level that she didn't have clearance for, which bothered her less than the fact that 3 separate requisitions she'd filed had gone unanswered. In 11 years of service, that had never happened before. She filed it away in the part of her mind reserved for things that mattered but couldn't be addressed yet, and watched Kodiak investigate a scrub willow with the thoroughness of a customs inspector. The 3 men appeared around the bend in the trail at 8:47 in the morning. She clocked them before they saw her. That was training. The first thing you learn to do, really learn, at the level where it happens without thought, is read a space before you enter it, and read the people already in it. These 3 were not hiking. Their boots were wrong for it. Heavy-soled, urban, the kind worn by people who stand on pavement. 2 of them were wearing dark hooded sweatshirts, despite the cold, which meant they weren't feeling the cold the way people feel it when they've been outside for a while. They hadn't. The 3rd was broader through the shoulders, older, a red flannel shirt open over a grey thermal, and he walked slightly behind the other 2, in the way that leaders sometimes do when they want the people in front of them to feel like they're in charge. Kodiak had already stopped investigating the willow. He was standing still now, watching them, and his tail was low and still. She shortened her grip on the lead slightly and kept walking at the same pace. The 2 in front slowed when they were 20 meters out. Not stopped, slowed. The small adjustment of people who are recalibrating based on something they'd expected to be different. She filed that away too. "Morning," she said, because that was what you said on a trail in BC, and because there was information in how people responded to normal things. The taller of the 2 in front, mid-20s, jaw working slightly, the particular restlessness of someone who'd made a decision and was waiting for the moment to act on it, gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said. Then, looking down at Kodiak, "Nice dog." "Thank you," she said. She kept walking. The broader man in the flannel, she'd mentally assigned him the role of the one who thought he was running this, stepped slightly to the side as she approached, not quite enough to clear the path. A crowding move. She'd seen it 100 times in 100 different configurations. It was designed to make you hesitate, veer, show that you could be redirected. She didn't veer. "Actually," the taller one said, from behind her now, "we need to talk to you for a minute." She turned around, not fast, there was no benefit to fast, not yet. She turned around the way you turn around when someone calls your name in a grocery store. All three of them had repositioned. The flannel man was directly in front of her on the trail. The taller one had moved to her left. The third, the quietest one, a compact man with a shaved head and ink crawling up the side of his neck, had drifted right. It was a basic three-point encirclement, the kind that worked well on people who didn't know what a three-point encirclement was. Kodiak was standing at her left knee, not pulling, not growling, just standing, weight slightly forward, watching the man in flannel with a stillness that was itself a kind of sound. "What can I help you with?" she said. It wasn't entirely a question. The flannel man looked at Kodiak. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, but the awareness that Kodiak was a variable he hadn't fully calculated. "We're looking for something," he said. "Something that came through this area a few days ago. Compact, about this long." He indicated a length with his hands, roughly the dimensions of a hard-sided transport case, the kind used for sensitive equipment. "You seen anything like that?" She had, actually, but not in the way he meant, and not on this trail. "Can't say I have," she said. "Maybe you should think harder," the taller one said. He'd moved again, slightly closer, and she was tracking him in her peripheral without looking at him directly. "I've thought about it," she said. "I haven't seen anything." The flannel man's gaze went back to Kodiak. "That's a working dog," he said. It wasn't a question. "Retired," she said. "Retired dogs can still be useful." He said it with a particular flatness. "For finding things, we might need to borrow him for a while." The temperature on the trail didn't change. The wind moved through the scrub at the same speed. The light on the lake stayed exactly the same as it had been. But something shifted in Hazel Vorn, and it was not panic, and it was not anger, and it was not fear. It was the thing that her training had built in the space where those emotions used to live. A cold, bright clarity, like the air over the mountains before a storm. Nobody was borrowing Kodiak. "I'm going to tell you once," she said, and her voice was completely level. "Walk away, right now. Go back to wherever you parked, get in your vehicle, and drive away from this trail. That's the only version of this morning that ends well for you." The taller one laughed. It was the kind of laugh people use to manage their own nerves. "Or what? You going to call your dog on us?" She didn't answer that. The flannel man had clearly decided that the conversation was over. He took a step toward her, his hand going inside his jacket. Not a weapon yet, just the suggestion of one, the oldest kind of leverage, and said, "We're not asking any more." "Kodiak," she said. "Stel." The word was Dutch. In the military working dog program, commands were given in Dutch for exactly the reason that now mattered, so that a stranger couldn't accidentally or intentionally redirect a working animal. Stel meant halt, stand, be ready. Kodiak went motionless. Not the motionlessness of a frightened animal, the motionlessness of a loaded mechanism. The flannel man hesitated. That hesitation was the last advantage he had, and he spent it doing nothing. The taller one moved first. A lunge from her left, arm extended, reaching for Kodiak's collar with the confidence of someone who had never in their life been corrected by a Belgian Malinois. He didn't make it. Kodiak didn't need her command to understand that a hand reaching for his collar in that context was not a friendly hand. He moved with the particular economy of a dog who had been trained to neutralize a threat without wasting energy on drama. A pivot, a controlled bite on the forearm, and the taller one went down, making a sound that was more surprise than pain, though the pain would catch up shortly. The flannel man pulled whatever was in his jacket. It was a collapsible baton, extended now, and he swung it in a wide arc that was meant to be intimidating rather than precise. That was a mistake in technique. Wide arcs give you time. She stepped inside it. What happened in the next 4 seconds was the product of 11 years of training, 2 combat deployments, and several hundred hours of hand-to-hand work with instructors who did not take it easy on her because of anything. The baton clattered onto the trail gravel. The flannel man found his wrist at an angle that wrists are not designed to occupy, and then he found the ground, and then he found that the woman with her knee between his shoulder blades and her forearm across the back of his neck weighed. At this particular moment, considerably more than her physical frame suggested. "Don't move," she said. He did not move. The third man, the compact one with the neck ink, had started forward and then stopped when Kodiak redirected his attention. He was standing very still now, hands out at his sides, looking at 72 pounds of Belgian Malinois that was looking back at him with professional patience. "Call him off," the man said. His voice had changed. The flatness was gone. "Sit down on the ground," she said, from her position above the flannel man. "Cross your legs, hands where I can see them." A long moment. Then the compact man sat down on the trail, cross-legged, hands on his knees. The taller one was still down, cradling his forearm, and had apparently decided that the least painful available option was to stay very still. She kept the flannel man pinned and pulled her phone. The call she made was not to 911, although 911 was going to get a call shortly. It was to a number she'd had memorized since March, a number attached to a name she wasn't going to say out loud on this trail. The call connected on the second ring. "Vorn," she said. "Trail access point, Kamloops Lake, East End. I have 3 in custody. You're going to want to come see what they were looking for." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Are you hurt?" "No. Kodiak. He's fine." Another pause. "We're 12 minutes out. Hold position." She held position. What she hadn't said on the call. What she didn't need to say, because the person on the other end already knew, was that the transport case the flannel man had described matched the dimensions of a classified signals intelligence package that had been reported missing from a CFB staging area 4 days ago. A package that, if it reached the people who were apparently waiting for it somewhere north of Kamloops, would represent a genuine and significant problem for several ongoing operations she didn't have clearance to know the details of. She'd known it was missing. She hadn't known it was this close. The flannel man made a small experimental movement beneath her, testing whether her focus had wandered. It had not. "I told you once," she said quietly, directly into the back of his head. "I gave you the chance to walk away. You had it. You chose not to use it." He said nothing. "The dog you were going to borrow," she continued, still quietly, "has served 2 combat tours, been decorated twice, and has more operational training than everyone in your group combined. You were going to borrow him." Something in the man's posture changed, not resistance, the deflation that comes when the full architecture of a bad decision becomes visible. The 12 minutes passed. She heard the vehicles before she saw them. 2 unmarked SUVs coming along the service road that paralleled the trail, moving fast but without sirens. 4 people in tactical gear deployed from the first vehicle before it had fully stopped. 2 more from the second, these ones in jackets that said RCMP in letters large enough to read from 30 meters. The person she'd called came last. Major Delia Forsyth, Canadian Forces Intelligence Branch, wearing a fleece vest over her uniform and an expression that was professionally unreadable except to people who knew her well. Hazel knew her well. Delia looked at the 3 men, one still on the ground, one sitting cross-legged, one being helped up by a tactical officer with his arm already being assessed. And then she looked at Hazel, and then she looked at Kodiak, who had relinquished his watch position and was now sitting beside Hazel's left boot with the composed satisfaction of a professional whose expertise had been correctly applied. "The case?" Delia said. "They were looking for it," Hazel said. "They didn't have it yet, which means someone does." Delia nodded slowly. "We know where it is. We found it 40 minutes ago, 5 kilometers north. That's why we were already close." She paused. "They were supposed to be the pickup." Hazel looked at the flannel man, now being zip-tied by a tactical officer, with the brisk efficiency of someone who did this regularly. He was staring at the ground and not making eye contact with anyone. "They didn't know the package had already been recovered," she said. "No," Delia said. "They didn't." The morning had gone quiet again. The lake was doing what it had been doing the whole time. Sitting there, cold and grey and enormous, with the mountains behind it and the frost still on the low grass and the sun working its way up through the clouds above the ridgeline. A raven called somewhere to the north. The sound carried. Kodiak leaned against her leg. She reached down and put her hand on the back of his neck, and he turned his head briefly to look up at her with the calm, dark eyes that she had looked into on a rooftop in Helmand Province, while she waited for the medevac to arrive and talk to him in a low, steady voice about absolutely nothing. About the weather, about the drive home, about what they were going to do when they landed in Edmonton, just to keep him conscious and to keep herself from falling apart. He'd made it. They both had. One of the RCMP officers was asking her for a statement. She straightened up and gave it. Dates, times, positions, sequence of events, everything precise, and in order, the way you learned to do when your account of a situation needed to be useful rather than just honest. Delia listened without interrupting, her notepad out, and when Hazel finished, she said, "The 3 men, you've never seen them before today?" "No, and you were on the trail because—" "I walk him here on Tuesdays," Hazel said. "He likes the water." Delia looked at Kodiak again, and for just a moment the professionally unreadable expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Right," she said. "Of course he does." The tactical team finished processing the scene. The 3 men were loaded into the first SUV. An evidence team arrived and began working the area around the trail access point, looking for secondary evidence. A vehicle nearby, communication devices, anything that would help unravel the chain between these 3 and whoever had arranged the original theft. Hazel stayed until they released her, which was just over an hour. She gave her contact information, confirmed her availability for follow-up, and signed 3 separate forms because the Canadian forces ran on paper the same way they ran on diesel and cold coffee, regardless of conditions, regardless of circumstance. When it was done, she and Kodiak walked back to the truck. He jumped up into the cab with the ease of an animal who had spent years moving between environments, aircraft, vehicles, buildings, open ground, and settled himself on the passenger seat with his chin resting on the door panel, watching the lake as she started the engine. She sat for a moment before putting it in gear. 11 years, 2 deployments, 147 separate operational actions, though she didn't think about them in those terms, because the number implied a kind of accounting that didn't apply to most of what she'd done. 1 discharge of her sidearm in a country she couldn't name in a document with a civilian signature. Several hundred training hours with instructors who didn't take it easy on her. A scar on her forearm that she ran her thumb over when she was thinking hard about something. And 1 morning in October on a trail along Kamloops Lake, where 3 men had made the particular and irreversible mistake of looking at her and seeing only what they wanted to see. She pulled out of the gravel lot and onto the highway, the mountains in the rearview mirror and the heater working slowly against the cold air, and Kodiak watched the lake until it disappeared around the bend. She didn't look back, neither did he.